Hi everyone, I'm going to post the assignment to Solution, but I wanted to just create this video just to go through it so I could kind of just talk about a couple of points while I was building this little script. Okay, so here's the assignment. It says create a script which saves items to a list. So really we're just taking user input as strings and putting them into a list. Okay, so pretty straightforward. The only thing that's special here is that the items should be printed like this. When a blank item is entered, we should print the items like this. So, couple things. When you come across an assignment like this, really kind of the main idea is that we're adding the items to a list, and work on this in very small pieces. Okay, so I'm going to kind of build it in like an iterative approach so that we can kind of add pieces together. Okay, so what we have here is so we need raw input. We know that because we need to take the user's input. So I'm going to take, I'm going to say my item, and I'm right off the bat, first thing, application is just going to ask for input. So it's going to say enter your item. Okay, and user is going to enter an item, and that will be saved as my item. Now remember, my item is a string at this point. Okay, so the other thing that we need here is we need a list, and we need to declare this list in the application. So actually, before we even do this, I'm going to say my list equals blank list. And to start, we'll have no items in the list. So my item, after you enter the item, we want to add it to the list. So we know how to add things to a list. We use the append method. So I will say my list dot append my item. Okay, so we can append a string directly, but we want to append a variable. We want the item. The thing we're appending to the list actually comes from a variable. It's called my item. So we say my list dot append, and just as a proof of concept, I'm going to print my list right here. Okay. Enter the item 1. Okay, and notice the program ends execution, and that's it. Okay, so the kind of there's really the two parts of this application. There's the adding the items to the list, and then there's the printing the items. The printing the items are user interface things. So again, I'm going to kind of reference this idea of the fact that we have this user interface layer. We have memory, and we have disk. Now in this application there's nothing on disk. Okay, so actually this is pretty much negated. We don't do anything here. This is where the printing happens. So this is this part. Okay, so we're going to kind of, that's a user interface item. And the part that we've already kind of done a little bit of is the memory part. So that's the application logic and stuff that's happening in memory. Okay, so that's a very basic version of kind of just the adding the item to the list. Okay, there's a couple of problems. One, we can't add multiple items because the application terminates. Two, we are not printing the items in the proper way. So at this point, you can kind of pick and choose which thing you want to tackle next. I think that for the sake of the demonstration, I think it probably is best to talk about how to add multiple items to the list. So we'll continue to go down the path of adding items, right, till we get that part of the application set up before we go on and tackle the user interface side. And I tend to like to do that, get everything all set up in memory, get all the logic worked out, and then at the really the end, right, then you can work on the presentation of the data. Not everyone uses this approach, and it depends on the application you're building. So if you're building something that's very user interface heavy and there's a lot of user interface things, obviously you're going to spend a lot of time working on that. But for the sake of this class, I'm gonna work on the logic here. So This part of the application, it only runs once. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a while loop because we want this to repeatedly run over and over again and append items. So after we append the item, so we'll just include this. This is really just for debugging, right? But we'll include this. Okay, these 3 lines of code, we want these 3 lines of code to run repeatedly. Okay, and so this gets into program flow and for our application. And so the tool that we can use here that I would suggest to use is a while loop. So I'm going to say while, and I'm going to say my item is not equal to blank. Okay, so the only catch here is that we're using my item, but it hasn't been defined yet because my item gets defined down here. So if you run this, you're going to have an error. It will say, no, I guess we don't have an error. Okay. Regardless, okay, this is not a good idea because my item hasn't actually been defined, and we were saying while my item is not blank. So somehow Python handles it, but we should define my item here, and we should set it equal to a to just something. So I'm going to just set it equal to x. Okay. I think what's happening is my item is being evaluated. It is not blank. It's actually undefined, and that's why this is true at first. I'm going to give it a value. Okay, but this value, it doesn't really matter what you give it here because it will be cleared as soon as the item is entered. All right? All right, so while my item is not equal to blank, my item equals raw input, enter your item. Okay, my item gets appended, print the total list, not just the item, the entire list. Okay, and then we go back up to the top, and my item now is now going to be not blank still, so it will run again. Okay, so that's the idea. So let's just test that part of the functionality there. Oops. Okay, so this is something that can happen in Jupyter, and if you restart the kernel, if you interrupt the program flow, sometimes this is a bug that will happen. So, all right, so enter your item. I'm going to say item 1. Enter your item. I'm going to say item 2, and I'm going to say item 3. And notice I entered a blank item, and the program exited. Okay, so the only thing is that that item got added here, and that's a little bit of an exception. So just one more piece of logic that we have to add is we don't want to append this item if it is blank because we're essentially going to skip. So I'm just going to say if my item is not blank, append it. Okay? All right, so now finally at the very end of the application, we want to print this list. And we only want to print the list. If you notice in the directions, the list of items should print. So if the user enters a blank item, the script should print the list of items. Okay, so it only prints the list of items if the blank item is entered, and then it should exit. Okay, the list of items should be printed on its own line. A number should be in front of the item. Okay, so this is the actual item. This is just the number for it. All right, so we need to deal with finally the UI part. Okay. So everything's in this list. So really what we just need to do is iterate over the list and print the items with that little number next to it. All right, so I'm going to create a for loop to do that. I'm going to say for item in my list. I'm going to say print item. Okay, and I'm not even going to worry about the numbering right now. Okay, and so this is when you're working on applications, do the very bare minimum, get it working, and then you can slowly add extra components. Okay, so we need the structural part, just iterate through the list. Okay, and print the item. All right, so I'm actually going to remove this print my list part here. This is just for debugging, so we can get rid of that now. So I'll say 1, 2, 3, and notice now it's not printing the list here. And now I have to enter blank. Okay, and notice we printed the items 1, 2, 3. All right, so the only thing left is to do the formatting and the numbering. Okay, so we will do that with just create a counter. I'm going to say I equals 1, some variable, declared as an integer. And down here, I want to print the item, but before the item, I want to print I plus, and notice the format is this, it's I plus dot parenthesis and then space. So dot parenthesis space. Now the only problem here is that going back to I think lesson 1, remember I is an integer, this is a string, this is a string. So this won't actually work. This will actually, you'll get an error because it can't concatenate a string and integer put together. So we just have to do a simple conversion here to make that work right. All right, let's see how this looks. Oops. Item. Didn't put the other concatenator in here. All right. So 1, 2. I'm going to put these seemingly out of order. Blank. Oh, yep, forgot to add one to I. Okay, let's try this again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Blank. Okay, there you go. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're labeled properly. And these can be obviously items of any text, but I'm just entering them like that. They can be items of the same text. So if I entered an item that's each time, S each time, right? We're going to get all the same items. Okay, but very simple. Really just kind of storing things in lists and then retrieving those items from the list. Okay, so pretty simple assignment. I think the thing that's probably the most difficult that we haven't really talked too much about is using while for program flow. Okay, so you know, while has lots of different uses, and I don't know that we talked about using it exactly in this context, but remember, as long as this condition is true, okay, the while loop will continue to loop. And so the condition my item is not blank is always going to be true unless the user enters a blank item. Okay, so you can use while loops to keep a program running, persisting until the condition is not true. Okay, and notice this for loop, right? This is outside of the while loop, so it's not indented. And that's another thing, the first assignment where we have to have nested code. And so notice that all of this stuff happens inside of the while loop, so it's going to happen repeatedly, while down here, this is outside of the while loop. It's the same nesting level, so it's the same indentation level here. And because it's outside of the loop, it only runs once after the loop completes. Okay, because we don't want, if we did something like this, it would actually print all of the items every single time. And actually, by simply doing that, I can kind of show you, right? So 2, right, 3, and you can see what's happening. It's printing all 3 of the items, right, for number 3. Okay, it's printing all of the items in the list every time we enter an item in the list. And we don't want that behavior. So we'll do that. All right, so that's the result. And if you get this situation where it's not running your code, it's because it's actually already running. So you just have to restart the kernel, and it will tell you it's ready, and then you can set this up, run this like that, and test your application. All right, so I hope the demonstration helped. This will be posted. A link to this page will be posted under this video for your reference. Thanks.